Hello, and welcome back to the Conspiracy Couple podcast. I'm Marisa.
And I'm Ethan.
And today we have another very famous case that we are going to be diving into. But before we get started, I will toss it over to Ethan and he will address social media and updates.
Conspiracy Couple Podcasts on all platforms, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. If you are currently listening and want to watch us, go ahead and search us up in the YouTube search bar, subscribe, turn on post notifications if you feel like it. And if you are currently watching this, go ahead and give it a like and leave a comment letting us know what you think about today's episode or giving us suggestions for future topics. And if you are an audio listener only, please give us a 5-star rating and review, letting us know what you think about the podcast and giving us, again, future topic ideas in there. I think that's everything. Okay. No updates.
So we're just going to dive right in because I have a lot of notes. And so I'm just going to get into it. So this week on the podcast, we're going to be discussing another very, very famous missing person case. And the reason that I chose to do this one was because it's been back in the news, like a lot. And there's been some really interesting coverage or new developments, I guess. I put that in quotation marks because if you haven't heard them, we'll find out why it's in quotation marks.
You could just tell us.
So today we are going to be discussing the case of Madeleine McCann. So Ethan, as always, have you heard anything about this?
I have not.
Okay. So I just want to start off with a very brief content warning. This does involve the disappearance of a little girl, and there are going to be like brief mentions to child abuse. I'm going to try and keep it very,
right.
I don't want to mention it too much because I think it's abhorrent.
But it is in part.
But it is a part.
Story.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
we will discuss it with care.
Correct. Yeah. So I did just want to let you guys know that because that is a very sensitive thing to talk about. So we're just going to start with the incident. So Madeleine McCann is who this case centers around, and she was born May 12th, 2003, to her parents Kate and Gary. It's either Gary or Jerry. I think it's Gary. Gary McCann, and she was born after a long period of infertility, and she actually was born after they had gone through a couple rounds of IVF. So then we fast forward to May 2007. A couple days before her 4th birthday. The McCann family is on vacation together in Portugal, and they are staying at the Ocean Club in a little resort town of Praia da Luz, and they were staying there along with 7 of the adults' friends, and then the adults' friends' kids. And so the family was from the UK, and consisted of parents, Kate and Gary, and they were both doctors. They're both physicians in the UK. Madeleine, and then she had younger twin siblings, a little brother and a little sister. So on the night of May 3rd, Kate and Gary, I think it's Jerry. We're going to start with Jerry. We're going to go with Jerry.
How is it spelled?
Gerry. We're going to say Jerry.
It might be Jerry. I don't know. Okay.
So the family was from the UK and consisted of parents Kate and Jerry. We looked up, it was Jerry, right?
It is Jerry.
Okay, I forgot as soon as I walked away.
I don't know you walked away.
Oh, I didn't walk away. So the 2 of them were physicians.
Why did she walk away?
And then there was Madeleine, and then there were 2 younger twins, and they were a boy and a girl. So on the night of May 3rd, Kate and Jerry went out to dinner with all of the friends who were also staying at the resort with them. So there were 9 adults in total and a bunch of kids. So the adults all go to a restaurant that's in the resort complex, and they leave the kids to stay by themselves, sleeping in the rooms. So all of the adults leave their kids at home in the rooms. So the rooms were about 50 yards or like 130 feet away. And before they had left, the door to the room had been left unlocked by the parents. Both the front door and also the sliding glass door onto the veranda were unlocked.
Why?
So,
okay.
The area by tourists was considered to be very family friendly and safe. So we're going to get into what the reality was after, but the tourist idea was the resort is safe, the resort is family friendly, it's a place where you can come with your kids. So this dinner experience was something that the group had been doing for the entirety of the trip. And so they got there at the end of April. This was May 3rd. They had been doing this every night of the trip, basically, where they would put the kids to bed and then the adults would leave and go get something to eat at the restaurant.
Makes sense to me.
So they would go to this tapas restaurant and eat and drink while their kids were in the rooms by themselves. So at 6:30, one of the friends from the group said that he went over to check on Kate and the kids. Now, we don't know how long he was there or why he went over there, but if that's the case, then he would be the last person to have seen Madeleine outside of the immediate family. So at 7, the McCann kids are put to bed, and at about 8:30 p.m., they leave for the restaurant. Jerry says that their seats at the restaurant are facing the apartment that the kids were staying at, and that they could see one of the entrances into the apartment. Kate said that their seats were not facing the apartment.
So we already have
some discrepancies.
Yeah.
So what the adults in the group had done was they created this system where they would each, at various points in the evening, leave. So like at about every 15 minutes, they would leave in a rotating order to go and check on the kids. So apparently it was like a super quick walk from the restaurant to the apartment, and it would take less than 5 minutes to get there.
Right.
So they had this system, okay, every 15 minutes, like so-and-so will get up and check on his kids, and then they'll come back. And then the next 15 minutes will come. Okay. So the Ocean Club, which is the resort they were staying at, had an evening babysitting service available to guests staying at the resort. But the group decided that they didn't want to use this service because they didn't want to leave their kids with strangers. And so they decided they would just leave them alone.
With no one.
Right. So at around 9:30 p.m., now this is about an hour after they go to dinner, one of the men in the group goes to check on his kids. And he offers to look in on the McCann kids while he's doing this. So he lets himself into the McCann's apartment, and he looks through the door, and he says the door to the kids' room was cracked open. So it was like kind of halfway open. So he said there was enough light for him to see the twins in their beds sleeping, but because of where he was in the entrance, he didn't go into the room. He kind of stood at the entrance of the room. He could not see Madeleine. But he said that because the room was quiet, he assumed she was just asleep, and so he goes back to the restaurant and he reports all is well. The kids are fine and asleep. So Kate's turn comes to check on the children at 10 p.m. So she gets up, she goes and she checks on the kids, and she finds that Madeleine is missing. So the twins are still in the room. They're still sound asleep when she checks on them, but Madeleine is gone. And she sees that one of the windows in the room was open. So Kate leaves the apartment, she leaves the twins, and she runs back to the restaurant and tells her friends that Madeleine is missing. So they call the police, and they, along with a lot of the guests at the resort, begin searching the grounds for Madeleine all through the night. So the interesting thing is that the twins don't wake up through all of this. Even when they were carried from their apartment to another apartment in the resort. But they just sleep the whole time. So keep that in the back of your head. So there's a lot of debate about the early days of the investigation, but there is a search that is done primarily by civilians the first night, and then it's kind of expanded after that. So one of the friends said that she had seen a strange man carrying a sleeping and barefoot child who was wearing pink pajamas out of the resort. But when she informed the police of this, they didn't really investigate it that hard. And she said that she saw this child while she was going to check on her own kids. So this man was apparently spotted about 45 minutes later by another person. So that's the disappearance. The early days of the investigation, like I said, it started off with a lot of volunteers. So thousands of volunteers come together to search the area for any sign of Madeleine. And initially, there wasn't like a big panic made by the authorities. They seemed to think that Madeleine had wandered off somewhere and that she would probably be back soon, that she had just gotten out of bed and wandered off and that they would find her and she'd be okay. And so the investigation didn't really kick off until the next day, which, if you think about a missing child, if she's found missing at 10 p.m. and then the investigation doesn't start till the next day, that's a lot of hours where nothing is happening. So even though people criticize the police response in the case, the abduction disappearance, I guess, created a media frenzy all over the world. Immediately, the media was descending, the world was involved, and it was a big deal. So about 2 weeks later, on May 12th, the Portuguese police say that they believe Madeleine is probably still alive somewhere on the island, and that she hadn't been found yet, that she had either been wandered off or she had been abducted. So something that was very frustrating for the family is that, according to the rules the Portuguese police followed, they weren't allowed to reveal any details in an open investigation to anyone. So the public, reporters, or even the family. So the family said they didn't really get any details from the investigation because they weren't able to. And this lack of information led to a lot of speculation and rumors. So we're going to kind of go through some dates and then we'll go back to like the beginning, the initial suspects. So May 26th, a description of a man seen the night of Madeleine's disappearance is released to the public by the police, saying that they believe this man was seen possibly carrying a child that night. So this is the description of the man that the friend had seen. Now, his image is not released to the public until the end of May. Apparently, Scotland Yard investigates these claims and learns that this was just a man on vacation carrying his own daughter. Now, some people say, no, it's not. Yes, it is. And so, again, this image was not released until 3 weeks later. So June, the police admit that the crime scene was not preserved very well, that there was a lot of problems with the crime scene, that there was probably the destruction of some vital clues in the disappearance, and we'll get into why that is. But they admit, yeah, we probably have some clues that are gone forever now. Also in June, an anonymous letter is sent to a Dutch newspaper saying that they know where Madeleine is buried, that she's dead and they know where she's buried. So they take this claim very seriously, the Dutch police, and this is because they had received similar letters regarding other cases in the past, which ended up being credible. This letter, however, did not turn out to be credible. And so I just want to pause here and just mention how many different police forces were involved from the beginning. We have the Portuguese police, we have Scotland Yard, we have the Dutch police, we have Interpol. A lot of people are kind of descending and trying to solve this case. So in August, 100 days after her disappearance, police state that it's likely that she will not be found alive. And in September, Kate and Jerry return home to the UK. Now, some people say that they are allowed to return home to the UK. Other people say that they flee to the UK. So we're going to get into that. And the case was officially closed by the Portuguese police about a year later, which seems really fast. A year later.
Yeah.
So, initial suspects. At the beginning of the investigation, Madeleine's parents, Kate and Jerry, were considered to be the main suspects in the disappearance. And so, this is kind of why there was a question of did they flee to the UK or were they allowed to go back to the UK? They were labeled to be arguidos, which means suspects. And so they had that label. That label was in the media that they were arguidos in this case. So one of the main pieces of evidence is that there were traces of blood found in the family's rental car and in the apartment. So this car was not rented by the family until 25 days after Madeleine went missing. So they do DNA testing on the blood in the apartment, on the blood in the car, and the blood in the apartment did not match Madeleine, and the car was inconclusive. Also, sniffer dogs went and picked out that car. After following the scent, they go to the rental car, and they zero in on this car from all the other ones in the lot. So, as I said, the family was questioned by the police. They were the main suspects for a very long time, according to the Portuguese police. So Kate McCann actually said that she had been pressured by the authorities to sign a confession, saying that Madeleine had died accidentally and that her and Jerry had staged the disappearance to cover it up. And she refused to do this, but Jerry said that he had also been told the same thing, that they needed to basically sign a confession saying that they were the ones who were behind this. And this kind of reminded me of like the JonBenet Ramsey case, because of course a lot of the attention was on her parents. But also whenever there's a disappearance or a murder, the authorities will always look at the family members first.
You look at the people closest and then you go further out.
Right. Yes, exactly. And so most of the time, there's a reason for that. Most of the time, it's the family members who are involved. I was listening to a podcast, and this reminded me of something, but it was a podcast about nutrition. So it was a medical nutrition-based podcast, but they said something that students are taught in medical school is if you hear hoofbeats, assume that it's horses and not zebras. Horses are the most common thing. Zebras are the most unlikely thing. So this is the same kind of thing. When someone goes missing, assume it's the most likely thing first. Now the problem is there was so much energy devoted to this first theory that a lot of the other theories weren't explored until after. People also really criticized the family and all of the families for leaving the kids alone when there was a babysitter available, multiple nights in a row, leaving them alone with unlocked doors. And a lot of people said if this was a family that was of lower social status, if they were not wealthy doctors from the UK, they probably would have been charged with child neglect for leaving their kids alone in an apartment. And that regardless of whether they did it, they were directly responsible, they left her vulnerable. Their actions left her vulnerable. And I think that there's definitely, merit to those concerns. Why would a parent, they're probably asking themselves the same thing. Why would I leave her? Why would I leave her? But of course you have to think, well, was she left vulnerable because of these actions? Why didn't they use the babysitter? Of course, if they think it's a family-friendly place, then they probably aren't going to be like, oh, yes, no biggie. But she was also 3 years old, and they were I think 1-year-old twins. So they were very little. Of course, the family has denied these claims. They have said they are innocent, but they were really the initial suspects, and a lot of the media attention was put on them, regardless of whether it was kind of warranted or not. So another initial suspect was a 33-year-old British man named Robert Morat. So he was from the UK. He had moved to Portugal, and he was a real estate developer in the area. And he actually lived down the street from the resort. And so he kind of inserted himself into the investigation, and he didn't know the family, but he inserted himself into the investigation, and he offered to help with interpretation between the family and the investigators, and communication, as he spoke the language. He spoke Portuguese, and they didn't. And so people thought that it was kind of, that he was inserting himself so much into this investigation when he didn't know them. Which, yes, that makes sense. That is definitely a suspicious thing where some random person is like, hey, let me help. A lot of times, maybe this is just sensationalized TV, but when people, certain personality types of people want to be involved in these things, if they've done it to see where the police are at. Of course, that's also sensationalized. But another person said that they had seen him at the resort shortly before Madeleine's disappearance, but his mom came forward and said that he had been with her that evening, so it couldn't have been him. But of course, people are like, that's his mom. Like, his mom's... I mean, some moms would lie for their kids and be a fake alibi. My mother would not. Your mother would not. But some moms would. And so some people are like, well, it's kind of the same thing as, like, if a girlfriend is like, yeah, he was with me. Like,
Right.
was he?
Right.
Or are you just saying that? Did he ask you to help and you said okay? His friends also said that he had that type of personality where he could be overly enthusiastic and that could lead to him being misunderstood by other people. Like, he's just a really helpful guy. He's a really nice, helpful guy. And sometimes that's not perceived as how he intends it to be.
Right.
Which he very well could have that very helpful personality trait. There are certainly people like that in the world. But I think a lot of times people are like,
Distrusting.
Yeah, it's kind of, when people are overly helpful, you can kind of get a little bit skeptical. But he was actually also cleared by the police around the same time as the parents were. So initially the police were kind of pursuing a few different directions. They had, after it was the parents, she just wandered off. Oh, then it was the parents. They were kind of going in a few different angles. So at first it was classified as a missing persons case. But then it changed to a kidnapping or abduction case. And those two may seem similar, but they are not. So missing persons, she wandered off. Abduction, okay, there's a person responsible, we have to find this person.
I think missing persons is more general, whereas kidnapping is more specific.
It's more specific, yeah.
Because I think a kidnapping could fall under missing persons, but missing persons doesn't fall under kidnapping.
Right. That's a great explanation.
Missing persons is more like the umbrella.
Yeah. Yeah.
Umbrella term.
They were investigating two different kind of veins in the kidnapping theory. So the first vein was that she was abducted by some kind of child abuse ring. The second vein was that she was kidnapped by an adoption group or network. So that it was kind of like human trafficking. They would kidnap kids and then sell them off in adoption scams. One of the big problems with the case was that at the beginning they were so honed in on the McCanns that they didn't release certain evidence that could have pointed to the kidnapper for a long time, like the sketch or other pieces of evidence that people could have used in the early days of the investigation. Whereas by the time it was released, if there was a kidnapper, they could have already fled Portugal.
Right.
As we know, Europe, all the countries are very connected, so you can easily flee to another country.
Right.
Apparently, there have been many sightings of who people believe is Madeleine McCann over the years, with nearly 10,000 total sightings in over 100 countries in the world.
Whoa.
So Scotland Yard investigated every single credible lead, but found nothing as a result. So in 2008, there were 2 sightings from the same place in Mallorca, Spain. So a British couple vacationing in the area saw a child resembling Madeleine with 2 women with dark complexions that didn't look anything like her. And they said that it looked as though the little girl was wearing a wig as she sat on the beach. And so when the Spanish police tried to investigate, they found that the child and the 2 women had disappeared. And so a lot of people believe, because of all the sightings, that Madeleine is still alive somewhere. That's one of the theories, is that she's alive, regardless of like what happened to her. She's out there. And so that will play into the development. So now we get into some of the theories. So one of the most popular theories is that she was abducted from the resort. So again, this is kind of, we have some veins of that one.
Okay, I was like, it seems like the main theory?
Yes, it's the main theory with some offshoots. So either she was abducted by a single person or some kind of group or network of people. So apparently, even though the area was reported to be very safe and family friendly to tourists, there was actually a history of abductions and assaults in the resort area. So it's actually not as safe as what was
Portrayed.
Portrayed.
Well, yeah, but you're not going to try and promote your family resort by telling people, oh, yeah, there's abductions and assaults here from time to time.
Right. They're like,
going to say, oh,
this is
it's safe,
it's family friendly. You can bring your kiddos. You can watch them at the babysitting section.
Right.
It's, of course, no family is going to take their kids to a place if the resort advertises, hey, we are not safe or family friendly.
Right.
Well, you would expect them not to, but some people will. But
yeah.
So people believe that someone had been watching the family and they knew that they had this habit of going to the tapas restaurant and that they would know their schedule, know when the family would get up to check on their kids, and that they would know when to strike.
I don't think I could go to tapas that much.
Well, I think they went because it was on the resort. It was in the resort and it was close.
Yeah, but tapas is just not my thing.
It's not your thing? Mm-hmm. Well, maybe you don't go here then.
I'm not planning on it.
So, if she was abducted by a single person, the assumption is that she would have ended up being killed. And then we would have expected some kind of a body to be found.
Why would that be the assumption?
Because that's what happens most of the time.
Okay.
Majority of the time when people are kidnapped, they do not turn up alive.
And there was never any sort of ransom note received, so...
Nope. However, even if that is the expectation, right? Even if that's the usual, even if that's the horse, the zebra still exists.
Right.
And there are cases where people who have been abducted have been held for years and years and years, and then they're found alive and recovered. It's rare, but it happens.
Right.
And so that's the theory. Another theory is that she was abducted and trafficked, whether that be into some kind of illegal adoption ring or something different. This is kind of because there is no evidence. There's a lot of lack of evidence, and so the ring or the group effort makes more sense.
Well, the idea, essentially what it boils down to is obviously without any actual idea of what happened or where she is or if she is alive, it really could be anything. And so it just is known that those types of trafficking rings do exist. And so it could be any of them.
And they're usually quite powerful rings. They have a lot of backing and
And so
ability.
it's one of those things where it's it's really open to anything.
Right. And Portugal's location would be quite advantageous to this, as it would be really easy to transport someone over the border into Spain and then travel from Spain into somewhere like Morocco.
Or anywhere, really.
Anywhere, really. And there had been sightings of Madeleine in Morocco, or supposed sightings.
And in Spain.
Yeah. So it's an easy location to transport someone.
Right.
Another theory is that she was killed during the course of a burglary. So this isn't a super popular theory.
Well, no, I can immediately think of counters to that.
Yes. What are some counters?
Why didn't the other kids wake up? Why did nobody report the sound of a burglary or a struggle or any sort of thing like that? Why was there no other evidence of a burglary other than the open window potentially? Why was nothing reported missing besides Madeleine?
Right, exactly.
You would have thought that there would be more to it.
There would be something stolen.
Right.
So this was very well investigated at the time because apparently there was a big increase in robberies in the area at that time. And there was a group of men that were questioned in relation to this in 2014. But Scotland Yard later said that it was an absurd theory because nothing had been stolen from the apartment.
Right.
Nothing besides Madeleine was missing. However, we will kind of go into a suspect that ties this theory and another theory together. Another theory is that there had been some kind of an accident that resulted in Madeleine's death, and her parents had covered it up by staging the disappearance. So supporters of this theory believe that she was sedated by her parents so that they could go out with their friends to the restaurant, and then when she passed away, either her parents by themselves covered it up, or had their friends help them cover it up. And then they later returned to dispose of her body, even with all of the media circus surrounding them. So apparently there was a medication found in the home that was commonly used by British parents to help their kids get to sleep. So it was kind of like a lot of people say like Benadryl, but it was British. So people note like, okay, it was really strange. The twins slept through the whole thing and that they kind of acted like they were drugged because they were so sleepy. And Kate herself said, had they been drugged, it seemed like they were drugged. Of course, then that kind of leads the question of like, if she's thinking, I think they're drugged, she's probably not going to say that if she had drugged them. Right?
And this was something that we talked about with Joan Benet Ramsey. It would take a very sadistic mind to if you accidentally kill your child, to then go through this process of covering it up and do it so effectively that the police who are immediately investigating you don't find anything. Like, these are doctors. They're not like professional killers.
And they're doctors, so they would know how to
So
administer medication.
Maybe they did drug Madeleine and the twins, and maybe that was why the twins were so sleepy. But again, how are they going to cover that up? And why?
And then would they wait?
Whose first reaction to that would be, oh my gosh, we killed our daughter, let's cover it up. Like, that's insane. And the amount of like emotional like stuff you're going through in that moment, like, there's going to be slip-ups. You're not going to be able to very cleanly cover up your own accidental murder or anything like that.
Especially considering they believe that it happened. The cleanup happened 3 weeks later when the media was hounding them. The police were hounding them.
Yeah, no. There's no way.
Yeah. And then, of course, the sighting is there were inconsistencies in information that was shared. The sniffer dogs pointing to the car. The DNA in the car and in the house. However, sniffer dogs aren't always 100% reliable, right? I mean,
couldn't they have had Madeleine's clothes and brought that in the car, and then that's what the dogs are smelling?
Certainly, yeah, certainly. And Kate was carrying around one of Madeleine's stuffed animals,
right?
Basically everywhere she went,
right?
And dogs are a very important member of the investigative team, but dogs are dogs. Dogs are animals. And animals are unpredictable.
It's not a dog sniffing and getting to a certain area isn't evidence you can use in court. Because the reason they're used is because they can help you find evidence. But they didn't find evidence. They just found, this could potentially be where evidence was. But that doesn't mean anything. Yeah. It could mean a lot of things. The dogs are useful when they help you find something that is useful.
Right.
But other than that, they're just there to be an extra resource. They're not there to solve the crime.
Right. And the DNA testing was not conclusive. So we already talked about that one. But a lot of people still hold on to the belief that they were involved. That they were somehow involved. Whether that be the accidental death or that they had sold her into this ring themselves. Which I find, I'm not even going to say anything, but there's no evidence for that one at all. So another theory is that she woke up in the middle of the night, she went to go find her parents, she's 3 years old, and she got in an accident of some kind. Mm-hmm. Of course, there is no theory. Right. Or there's no theory. There's no evidence.
Right.
And that's the one that the roadblock that keeps getting run into. There's no evidence.
We're going to keep running into that.
Yeah. Of course, because the internet is going to do the internet. What the internet always does. Some people question whether the Illuminati or the Freemasons took her. I don't know why they would do that. But
put her in the giant L.
One thing the internet will do is the internet will internet. And that's just the thing.
Are you going to try and coin that?
No. I think it sounds silly. But if someone wants to coin it,
Credit me.
Go
for it.
Yeah.
Do your thing.
So there was no real suspect that ever emerged. There has never been any arrest. There has never been any trial. Nothing. There have been hundreds of suspects who have been investigated and ultimately eliminated. But in 2020, people thought that they had cracked the case. So in June 2020, a German prisoner in his 40s named Christian Bruckner was identified as the prime suspect in the disappearance by German authorities.
Why are the German authorities getting involved?
We'll get there. So at the time of the disappearance, he lived in a home about 1 mile away from where she was abducted. He had fled Germany because of unrelated charges and was living in Portugal. And his cell phone tracked to the resort at the time of her disappearance. So this man is evil. He is just evil to the core. He is a known abuser, a child abuser. He has a huge list of crimes ranging from like theft to assault. He's an evil man. And his first arrest came at the age of 15 for theft. And at this time, he fled Germany and went to Portugal because he wanted to escape prison time. And he was known for stealing from hotel resorts in Playa de Luz while he lived there. So that kind of ties the burglary one. Now, at the same press release where the German prosecutor declared that this man was the prime suspect, he also basically stated that he believed very strongly that Madeleine was dead. Now, he stated he had no forensic evidence to confirm this, but that he had other evidence he felt would point in this direction. So apparently in 2017, Bruckner had made a drunken confession stating that he knew what had happened to Madeleine McCann. And that, plus where he lived, his proximity, the cell phone, was the evidence. So ultimately, he has never been charged.
Right.
He has never been charged in this. Even though German authorities were convinced it was him.
Well, realistically, at this point, nothing other than a full confession is going to bring a charge for this.
Right.
There's not enough evidence.
Right.
Especially so late in the game.
Right. And I think it's kind of irresponsible for them to have press release and say, she is dead. He killed her.
Yeah.
He's the one who did it. I have no evidence, but she's the one who did it.
It's very much trying to bookend something, but not actually being able to.
But you can't, yeah. German authorities say that this lead could have been better investigated at the time of the disappearance if Portuguese police had done a more thorough job.
Yeah, that's my thinking this whole time is I get why they spent so much time investigating the parents, because obviously those are your prime suspects right off the bat. However, you should be trying, especially early on, you should be trying to investigate every possible...
Cast your net wide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's like you need to be able to find any clue possible at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then you hone in on that. And obviously you're going to have your eyes on certain people. But why not?
Yeah. And I understand it's like their sentiment of like, well, if there would have been a more thorough investigation at the beginning, then we probably would have had the answer. Yes, probably
Right.
true. However, it's 13 years later,
Right.
and that's just not a reality. It didn't happen.
Exactly.
You can't go back in time.
No.
And of course, there's a question. If there had been a more thorough investigation, would there have been forensic evidence?
Maybe and maybe not.
Exactly.
It's entirely possible that nothing would have happened regardless.
So Bruckner actually says, I'm innocent. He claims his innocence and says that all of the evidence pointing to him is pretty much a coincidence.
I mean, it's all circumstantial at this point.
And he says he actually has an alibi. So he states that he was with a woman. Now, said woman says that she doesn't remember him coming over.
It doesn't matter anyway.
Right, it doesn't matter. Right.
He doesn't need
and
an
the
alibi
person
at this
said,
point.
like the German prosecutor said, we will not charge him until we have conclusive forensic evidence.
And they're not going to get
You're
it.
not going to have it.
They're not going to get
Exactly. So in 2022, German and Portuguese authorities said that they had identified a prime suspect, acting on the authority of German law enforcement, but they did not release a name. So it's unclear if the person they were talking about in 2022 is Bruckner or if it was someone else.
it. I mean, my assumption would be Bruckner.
My assumption is him, but if that's the case, why won't they name his name? They had no problem
because they realized the first time that they couldn't do anything about it, probably.
True. Right.
They're like, well, we still think it's him. We have no evidence, and we're not going to get any.
Yeah, is... So all of that leads us to, what is the recent development? Why is this something that is on my mind? Recently, a 21-year-old Polish woman named Julia Wendell has gone viral online for videos claiming that she is Madeleine McCann. So, in fact, her Instagram handle is I am Madeleine McCann. And it has over 1 million followers. So, Julia even went so far as to submit DNA samples to be tested to see whether she is Madeleine or not. And the results haven't come out yet, I don't think. And her parents, Kate and Jerry, submitted their own DNA samples to be compared.
The parents. We're not going to claim her as Madeleine until there's evidence.
Correct, yeah. So, of course, her parents are going to do that. Or the parents, Kate and Jerry, are going to do this because they still believe that Madeleine's alive.
Right, of course. I mean, you're holding out any sort of hope, right?
Mm-hmm. So, what is some of the evidence that she has brought forward that says, she is Madeleine? So, the two apparently share a rare eye defect, which is a coloboma in the right eye. Mm-hmm. So, if you don't know,
I don't.
A coloboma is a hole in the structure of the eye that results in a misshapen pupil.
Oh.
So, apparently the coloboma is much less pronounced in Julia's close-up images than in Madeleine's. But this is something that could be corrected with surgery or with corrective contact lenses.
Would it not have changed over the 20-something, or almost 20 years?
So these are photos from when Julia was a child.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Similar looking freckles. Okay. Apparently they have the same freckles. Julia says that she has missing medical records from the ages of 0 to 5, essentially saying that she doesn't exist in the area she grew up in until age 5.
Mm-hmm.
She also claims that she doesn't have any memories from her childhood.
Me neither.
Which, right, I'm like...
That doesn't necessarily mean anything.
That's pretty common, Julia. She also claims that she was assaulted by a German man who looks similar to one of the suspects in Madeleine's disappearance.
Okay.
So the theory is that Madeleine, Julia, so Madeleine in quotation marks, Julia, was trafficked into Poland as a child as part of an adoption ring, and her identity was changed. So she has since taken down all of her social media due to death threats, which she states are from the people who trafficked her.
So does Julia have was she adopted? Does she have adopted parents? We don't know any of this?
So she says yes, but
we don't...
Her parents say we're her parents. So we're going to get that.
Okay.
So Julia's parents have denied this claim. They're like, this is ridiculous. This is our daughter. They say that she has mental illness. She's suffering from mental illness. And they have refused to take DNA tests to confirm that they're her biological parents. Which some people find weird, but I find that totally reasonable. I think it's totally reasonable.
Yeah, it could go either way.
Because, if I was a parent and I see my child and I look at them and say, this child is having a mental break. She needs help.
It's giving very, I'm not going to...
support the delusion.
Yeah.
Yes, and I also...
But you could also, it could also be very,
And I would imagine that would be quite hurtful.
Yeah.
For her parents to say...
Well, it's...
For her to be saying I was trafficked.
If she's not Madeleine, which it's entirely likely she's not, it's hurtful to everybody involved. It's hurtful to Madeleine's parents. It's hurtful to Julia's parents. It's hurtful to basically just those people. Because those are really the only people involved. But
yeah. So
it's just hurtful.
Madeleine would be 19 today.
Mm-hmm.
Julia's 21. So...
But apparently she has
messed up medical records. So we don't know.
21.
She could actually be 19.
She could be anything. She could be 40.
Yes. So this was actually something recently that I was doing research. I came back a week later and there was another development.
Oh.
Julia is set to take the stage on a very famous American show to discuss her claims. Ethan, what show do you think Julia is going to go on?
The View. A very famous American show. Is it like a talk show?
Mm-hmm.
The Kelly Clarkson show.
No.
Drew Barrymore show.
More famous.
I don't know. Oprah.
Oprah's not on anymore.
Um,
She is going to be going on...
Ellen.
That's not on anymore
The
either.
Today Show.
She's going to be going on Dr. Phil.
Oh.
So Julia will be going on Dr. Phil. Her episode is actually going to be airing March 27th, where she is going to sit down with...
So tomorrow, by the time this is posted.
Yes, so she will be going on to the Dr. Phil show to talk about...
Are they going to have the
her
DNA
claims.
evidence?
I surely hope so. I feel like Dr. Phil would bring the evidence, but he also loves the attention.
Yeah.
So he definitely does tend
I don't
to...
think we're going to get anything out of this.
I think he does definitely tend to exploit these situations. And this is
Of
from
course he
someone
does.
who used to love Dr. Phil.
Because he has a show to produce.
So, yes, if you are listening to this podcast and you tune into the Dr. Phil show...
Or if you are Dr. Phil McGraw yourself.
Dr. Phil McGraw, if you listen to our podcast...
Well, he's not really a doctor, is he?
He was.
Not anymore.
But I think his license is not
active.
valid. Yeah, it's not active.
He's not a doctor.
Right. He was, but not
But
anymore.
he's not a doctor.
Yeah. Dr. Phil McGraw, if you listen to this show...
Mr. Phil McGraw.
Can you and Robin come on? Because I like Robin.
I don't really care to speak to either one of them.
Anyways.
I
So...
don't have much respect for Mr. Phil.
Anyways, we're moving on.
Which is what I will be calling him from now
We're
on.
moving on from
He
Mr.
will be
Phil.
Mr. Phil.
Okay. So that was the big thing, right? So I was like refreshing and seeing like have the DNA test come back.
Right.
I don't think they have not. But
They have not.
do you think that Julia is Madeleine?
No.
No, I don't either.
I don't.
I truthfully, and I'm addressing Julia right here. Okay, Julia, I'm talking to you. I think that Julia, you have something,
If it's a mental breakdown or some sort, then you need to get help.
and the people who are, there's like someone who's like representing her.
Of course.
You're exploiting
You're
her.
taking advantage of
You're
her.
taking advantage of her.
If you're just doing it for attention, you also need help, but of a different variety.
I think that is, and I'm about to get on my
Terrible.
soapbox.
It's just
One of the sickest things that you
yeah.
can do is to exploit a tragedy
Yep.
for clicks.
Yep.
Right? Like, her parents think she's still alive. She could still be alive.
Right.
But to get like, when I was thinking, okay, so she's coming forward and saying I'm Madeleine McCann. When I see she has an Instagram and a TikTok handle called I am Madeleine McCann, I'm like, I'm sorry, girl, you have no credibility.
Right. If you actually thought you were, why wouldn't you just reach out to the parents?
Or to the authorities.
Or like go through this process? Like doing it on social media very clearly makes it an attention thing, which again, if Julia is going through some sort of psychotic episode or some sort of thing, then obviously it's like very sad and she needs help. But it does seem very attention grabby, in which case is despicable. And again, you need help, but not the same type of help.
Mm-hmm. And I do think it is frustrating that she's getting a platform on Dr. Phil.
Right.
I think if this is something that would positively contribute to the investigation, excellent. But I think honestly, it's just a way to get views, and I think it's kind of disgusting that she's getting that platform.
It is.
Anyways, as of 2023, case has not been solved. There is no conclusive evidence pointing to any answer. Madeleine's family still is hopeful that she is alive.
Yeah.
But we just don't have any answers for that. And there's a lot of information regarding this case. I did a lot of research. I have all my sources listed, but there's a lot of information, and it would have been impossible for me to have included all of it in this episode. But we want to know, what do you think, Ethan? I think this is a really hard one.
I don't want to hazard a guess because I really just don't know, and I don't want to
speculate.
Yeah, I don't want to speculate.
I think that it's always sad. I mean, it's definitely a sad thing when you see children, go missing.
Yeah.
I have no clue. I have not a single clue about what had happened. I do think that this most recent development is very unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
And I do hope that something will come of it. Not necessarily this situation, but just in general.
Yeah.
But if you guys have some kind of a theory or you have evidence that points to something, let us know. If you watch the Dr. Phil episode, we do not have cable.
We're not gonna. I wasn't gonna watch it anyway.
I would watch it if we had cable. I might try and find it on YouTube, just because I'm curious. But if you watch the Dr. Phil episode, let us know, what the contents are, and if there's anything of value added to this conversation.
Highly unlikely.
I don't suspect that there will be, but if there is, let us know.
I mean, if there's any updates that you find, I'm sure we will post an update in our next episode.
Yes. But thank you for listening. We hope that we were sensitive with this topic.
Yeah.
And we'll be back in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.